Well, let's do this. Let's kind of dive in deep because this idea of mastering everyday obstacles to scale our business. So, here are the big challenges that came out of putting all together the answers from all the C suite executives on what are our biggest challenges to grow. So, the first one was internal alignment. Over 70% of C suite executives said that's our number one challenge, just aligning internally. The second one was a lack of deep understanding of the voice of our customer, right? That's the highest authority voice in our business, higher than the board, higher than us as C-suite executives, right? That's where we should be aligning behind. And then the third one is one that as CMOs we know really well. How do we balance long-term versus short-term? Nobody goes into a board meeting and has a board member look and say, "Hey, Vidya, how is that brand development plan going?"
Yeah.
Nobody says that, right? Like, hey, what's this quarter's quota look like? What's next quarter turning out? So it's something that we know we have to work on and we have to develop, even though it's something that we don't get a lot of credit for, and we don't get a lot of credit in terms of how that impacts growth,
Yeah.
but it does in a big way. And so I would love to just ask you to kind of just to start out here, right? Is because we're going to try to unpack this today and what does this mean for scaling our business. But talk to me about what you feel is the everyday barriers to creating sustainable growth that aren't the sexy ones, right? The ones that we've really got to focus on.
Yeah. Look, I think things usually boil down in my head, right? Things are usually very simple things that we all struggle with because as an organization, I can tell you about, what we are going through, right? Is in your organizations, this is Q4 for us. So you are trying to hit the targets, create the quarter pipe, close deals. So it's all hands on deck. And internal alignment, if it's not there across the sellers, across the marketing people doing the demand gen or events or whatever it is that we are trying to align on, no pun intended, right? You're going to have a lot of friction and no outcomes, right? Which is not a good thing for the organization. So sometimes the hardest nut to crack is the simplest of things that we struggle with, which is ensuring our teams cross functionally are aligned to the same goals that we all want to drive. And sometimes you have organizations all running towards hitting the goals in silos and not enough communication across cross functional teams is a huge challenge. Again, none of this is intentional because people are all running fast and furious every day, but they just forget to do it. And that's small lapse of not doing certain things just creates friction and creates unnecessary anxiety and finger pointing, right? At times that translates into a lot of noise, right? So the signal to noise ratio at times is primarily because of simple communication, simple engagements, keeping everybody from a sense of knowing what's happening and ensuring everybody's engaged in what we need to do cross functionally is the simplest of things that people can and should do to avoid the internal anxiety that happens with more organizations. And then that creates sort of a ripple effects in terms of how it becomes a barrier to expand and grow things because you can't get past this friction points within the organization. So to me, primarily when I think about scaling an organization, it's the ability for us to identify things that can be rinse and repeat. Because the operational things, the processes, these should be like clockwork, right? We shouldn't have issues in that. As the organization matures, depending on what size you are, I've worked for like the Cisco's of the world, ServiceNows of the world, and I work for Profix now, which is a much smaller company. So you can see the difference in sort of maturity of what is rinse and repeat and you can rely on versus where you have to sort of engage at varying levels of processes to ensure that everybody understands the mode of engagement, the way we communicate, way we bring people in to ensure there's no misalignment. And if we can get past that, then scaling that is going to be a breeze.